Thank you for downloading Ramblings. On today's programme, Clare Balding walks with Kate Harding. Kate is somebody that Clare has walked with before, and Clare has never forgotten her because of the impact that she made on her life. However, today, on this second walk, life has changed dramatically for Kate. In case you'd rather not listen, you may want to know in advance that the conversation is about the loss of Kate's husband through suicide.
It's a grey, overcast day, slightly humid, and a really light breeze is just rustling the leaves above my head. I've come to Kington, which bills itself as a centre for walking. It's right on the border of England and Wales in Herefordshire. And I've come here to meet a woman that I walked with 5.5 years ago. And she's called Dr. Kate Harding. And I remember it really clearly because it was just at a period in my life when I was stupidly busy, and I'd got to that stage where I couldn't cope, and I got very frustrated with the traffic getting to meet her, and arrived in a slightly, anxious state of mind. And she treated me as a case, I think, and said, right, I'm going to teach you mindfulness. And it's always stayed with me that she showed me how just being conscious of my body, trying not to think rather than overloading my brain with thoughts, could actually help me. And she showed me how walking could be therapeutic. And I'm meeting her again now because I think walking as therapy has become for her something absolutely a central pillar of her own support system. And I ought to give a slight warning to this programme, because those who have been through a recent bereavement may find it incredibly helpful, but may equally not want to listen. Kate's up ahead, the other side of the gate, with, is this Mo?
This is Mo. Indeed.
Oh, and Mo is a little King Charles Cavalier?
Yes, that's right, little Cavalier.
And he's very, very handsome. He's got those lovely, long dangly ears that all King Charleses have. How long have you had him?
I've had him since he was a puppy, so just over 3 years. And we also used to have the most beautiful fawn-coloured whippet. But he was rather naughty and one day chased 2 sheep and had to be rehomed that very day. And now he lives with a family by the beach in New Zealand, where we were living at the time. And there's not a sheep in sight, so I think he's quite content there. But we miss him dearly, and so does Mo, I think.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
So we've got a really broad sheep-shorn path ahead of us, bracken on either side, and in the distance, the big rounded bare hills of Wales. And we're walking up Hergest Ridge.
Hergest Ridge, it's pronounced locally, that's right, but it is spelled H-E-R, and it's part of Offa's Dyke.
Why have you chosen this walk, Kate?
Well, this walk is very meaningful to me because for a number of years, my husband and I and our 2 kids lived in Amley, which is a village just about 15 minutes drive from here, and we came here all the time. It helps you to connect with the ground under your feet and the sky above. There are amazing views when we get further on. There's something special about it.
So you mentioned living in New Zealand.
Yes.
And you've come home to Herefordshire.
That's right, yes, a few months ago now.
So tell me what you have been through.
We emigrated to New Zealand, must be just over 2 years ago now, in May 2016. That was because my husband Richard and I had always loved New Zealand and Australia, actually, and had lived in both. And then we came to Herefordshire, which we hadn't lived in before, but we came to love. And the pull of New Zealand began to reassert itself in latter years. We found a job for Richard, an intensive care job in Whangarei, which is a coastal town about 2 hours north of Auckland in the North Island.
You're a GP.
Yes, yeah.
And Richard?
Richard was an anaesthetist and intensive care consultant. But just as we prepared to emigrate, just as we'd sold our house and put all the contents of the house into a container, ready to go, he received his first ever letter of complaint. And this letter was from the General Medical Council. And it's a letter that every single doctor in the land dreads. We couldn't leave. We had to find holiday accommodation for the months that lay ahead. We knew that the wheels at the GMC turn slowly. We knew that the complaint, although we were confident it would be resolved in Richard's favour, which it was, we knew that wouldn't be a rapid process. And we knew that we couldn't possibly go and work in New Zealand until that was resolved because of the paperwork associated with it. So we had 5 months in total of working, luckily, back at our old jobs. We clawed our old jobs back. The kids had to go back to the schools that they thought they'd left forever. And we were just under this dark cloud, waiting and waiting, until finally we decided to go out to New Zealand anyway, just to end that state of limbo we were living in on my visa. So I got a job as a GP over there, and we went. And just as we went, we got confirmation that the complaint had been thrown out, and Richard was exonerated, and he was free to work in New Zealand, thankfully. But what happened next is that, it's interesting, but the effects of a complaint are much longer lasting than you might expect. So your mental state doesn't recover the day that you get the letter saying, look, you know what, it's all fine. You're not a bad doctor. You're a good doctor. Pat on the shoulder, keep on going. Actually, that's not what the letter says at all. All the letter says is the matter has been resolved. It doesn't actually say anything positive.
And is there any backup? Is there any support network provided by the GMC?
Well, they signpost you in the direction of support. So there are now organisations such as the DSN, the Doctors Support Network, who are very helpful. And there's also a Practitioners Health Programme, or PHP, which was founded by Clare Balding, one of the former presidents of the Royal College of GPs, which does great work with doctors with mental and physical illness. But the trouble is, Richard didn't really need that support at the time. And what we found is that the effects of the complaint were more insidious and went beyond that period. And actually he developed a depression after the complaint had been resolved and after we'd started to settle into our new life in New Zealand. In New Zealand he still had 2 months to go before he could start his new job, just because of the medical councils having to talk to each other and get the paperwork sorted out between them. And that was very bad for his mental health too, because he had no structure to his day. He wasn't getting involved in his new job. He wasn't yet meeting his new colleagues or started to look after his new patients. And that did him no favours at all. Exactly. And that was when he actually developed a clinical depression. So he'd had one once before in his mid-20s, actually when I first knew him, and hadn't had a recurrence for something like 23 years since then. So he wasn't somebody who was prone to annual or even more frequent depressions at all. Having said that, it had happened once before, and it certainly happened again. So he went to see his doctor. He was already doing all the things that we know help, such as lots of exercise and trying to get as much sleep as possible, spending time with his family, all of these things. But he knew he needed medication. So he went on to medication, and we waited and waited, and then suddenly, almost overnight, at about the 5-week mark, they kicked in, visibly really, and he did really well on them, and he was restored to his former self. And a few months later, once he was by that time fully in the swing of his new life in New Zealand, he was kayaking, he was open water swimming, running, he was absolutely loving it. So he came off the medication with the sanction of his GP, and for a few months he was fine. And then the following year, that's last year now, it recurred. And there weren't any specific life events that time. I firmly believe that it was fatigue. The major factor that year was tiredness. He had a more onerous on-call rota than he had had in the UK for various reasons. His sleep was more disturbed, and he started to slip back downwards again.
Did you start to get scared?
I was constantly worried about him, but I didn't get scared enough, it turns out.
Do you want to sit on this bench?
Yeah, that'd be lovely. Am I audibly out of breath?
No. I just think it sort of feels like one needs to stop.
Yeah. So what happened was he had a particularly bad day. One bank holiday Monday in October. I almost think he would be better off at work, actually. He was still working, and he was still functioning at work, as far as I know, perfectly well. And he woke up that morning. He was agitated, he just wasn't himself. It was a bit of a cabin feverish day. It was a bit grey. You know, so many things could have been different if it had been sunny, if he'd been able to go fishing that day with his mate, if he'd been at work having a bit of banter with his colleagues. But anyway, none of those things happened that day. And by the end of the afternoon, my daughter, who'd been at home all day, and she wanted to go for a dog walk with me, and I was happy about that. You know, it's nice to walk your dog with your daughter. And Richard prevaricated over whether to come with us or not. And then he said, but one of us has to cook dinner. Great. You know, he was the cook of the two of us. He was a really good cook. I said, okay. And then he died. He took his own life. Yeah. So by the time I came home, it must have been about half an hour later. He was absolutely, there was no bringing him back. My neighbours were brilliant. They were there immediately, very supportive. They took the kids off my hands, gave them sanctuary next door. And then the paramedics arrived. We were some way out of town, so it had taken some time. And they were brilliant in terms of supporting me, but there was nothing extra that they could offer. So we laid him out on the floor, put a duvet up to his chin, and he just looked as if he was asleep. And the kids came in, sat beside him and held his hand and said goodbye to him. And that was the last time we saw him.
There's a cooler breeze. I think we better keep moving.
Yeah. This is where we had a memorial walk for Richard a couple of months after we got back from New Zealand, which was just before Christmas. And some of his closest friends from this area and some of his work colleagues gathered here one absolutely beautiful, crisp blue sky day at the end of March. And we did this walk in his memory. There were no speeches, there was nothing formal about it. Kids came, there were lots of dogs, and it was just a beautiful couple of hours of walking somewhere that he had absolutely loved. He used to walk here, he used to mountain bike here, and it was somewhere that was very special to him. He absolutely loved being out in nature.
Ahead of us, at the end of this, the path that never ends, there are 3 fir trees, I think.
I think they're monkey puzzle trees.
Are they?
I think so, yeah.
And as they get closer, the definition of those branches will become clearer, and there are 2 walkers coming towards us, and that feeling of being miles away, and as we turn and look around, it's so undeveloped, this part of Herefordshire. And the hills in the distance are shrouded in low cloud, so there is a mystical, ancient quality to it. You can lose yourself or find yourself, one or t'other. And both are probably very useful. The other thing that you have to carry or shoulder is not just your grief, it's other people's.
Yes.
Your children most.
Yes, that's right.
You know, most clearly and most closely.
Yes.
But that feeling of having to understand and deal with what they're feeling, or indeed the times when they don't want to talk about,
which isn't much of the time, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, yeah, it's a constant challenge, and that has been my biggest source of worry and fear and self-doubt. But there are 3 of us now, and that's been a huge adjustment, and obviously it's ongoing. It's just been under 9 months, so we're not very far along the path, but I can feel us knitting together into a new family unit. It's taking shape, and certainly there have been major shifts in the dynamics of how we interact with each other. There's been some really hard times. I've been sick with worry at times over them. But, I feel overall that we're travelling in the right direction.
Hi there, how are you?
Sometimes I do think, you bloody idiot, how could you? He lost his own mother at a similar age to my children, mid-teens. He, of all people, knows what that's like, to lose a parent at such a vulnerable age. But when I do feel those stirrings of anger, usually what happens is they get directed against myself, because I saw how tortured he looked that final day. And I, for some reason, I did not let myself contemplate the danger that he was in. So, there is anger, but honestly it's mostly against myself, mixed in with a lot of guilt.
The guilt is something that I think an awful lot of people who may be listening to this, having been through tragically a similar situation, they will absolutely identify, not just with your pain, but also with your feeling of guilt.
Yes.
How do you protect yourself then from that maelstrom of self-blame and guilt and pain and loss and loneliness?
Well, I'm very, very well supported. I've got an army of friends, I've got family, lots of people who love me and the kids, and also who really loved Richard, and that is obviously a huge help. I try and make time to be on my own, even if it's just a quick dog walk or some time in the woods. That really helps me, and that does bring in those strands of mindfulness. Just even if it's just for 10 minutes a day, trying to be in the moment, noticing when my mind is spinning off on all these dark ruminations, bringing it back to the body, bringing it back to the present moment. That really does help. It also helps with the grieving, being able to do that, because although I'm talking to you in a perfectly composed way at the moment, and I do find that I can talk about Richard's death and even how it happened in quite a calm way, I'm also quite fortunate in that if I was on my own and I closed my eyes for a few minutes, as if to try and meditate, say, I can bring his face up and I can get in touch with those feelings of grief and loss, which are usually in my lower chest and my upper abdomen, and I can be in tears within a minute, which is something that I feel quite lucky to be able to do. It is a release. I'm also getting fantastic support from a psychologist who is acting sort of as my supervisor now that I've gone back to work at the hospice, St Michael's Hospice just outside Hereford. And obviously, I'm working with the dying there, and that could potentially throw up some emotional issues for me. And he is wonderful, a really helpful person who I can talk to every couple of months or every 6 weeks about how I am in my life and how I am at work if I need to. And that's something that actually is obligatory, or certainly strongly encouraged, in New Zealand for all hospice doctors, and which Richard was looking at trying to access for himself, also working in a sort of high-stress specialty, intensive care, which has got a lot of overlap, of course, with palliative care, as you'd imagine. And yet supervision isn't a routine thing for those doctors, nor for doctors in other, high need specialties, or specialties where you might think there was a high need for support, such as paediatrics or oncology or A&E. And I wonder if that's something that would have helped him, because despite his complaint having been completely thrown out, he did question his own judgment much more in the wake of it, and the ethical decisions that are a daily part of working in intensive care weighed on him a lot more heavily.
Have you therefore become much more concerned about the lack of support for those in stressful situations within the medical profession?
Yeah, it's become, a sort of growing interest of mine. There's still a lot of stigma around, particularly mental illness, amidst the medical profession. And there's a growing movement to try and remove that stigma gradually and break down some of the barriers. And more doctors are coming forward to talk about being prone to mental illness and yet managing to still work as doctors. And that, I think, is a great positive. And in fact, last week I was at a meeting in London organised by Clare Balding, and it was a chance to meet a number of other people who had similarly been bereaved by doctor suicide or sudden death. Mm-hmm. And what a powerful meeting that was, as you can imagine. And it was very striking amongst the people gathered there how much of a desire there was to make some sort of difference to other doctors and to other doctors' families, potentially in a similar position. Yeah. And I also have my weekly pub quiz night. Compare and contrast. Yes, exactly. Having virtually never stepped in a pub throughout my entire marriage, apart from the odd Sunday lunch, it is quite strange to me that I'm now a weekly pub goer.
Are you competitive then with your quiz
not at all,
team?
because I'm terrible at it. If there's the occasional literature or maybe geography question, I can pipe up. But, all these, you'd be amazing at it, but all these sports questions torture me every week.
I then get cross because the answer isn't always right. So I then question the answer.
Yes, that's a higher level of irritation that I won't ever be aspiring to.
I'm sort of thinking, but I might be wrong. I was kind of thinking that's north, but I might be wrong.
Oh, I've got my phone on me. We can get the compass out.
I love the compass. Oh, here, I've got it.
Oh, great, well done.
Oh, yeah, that is north.
You're a clever girl. Look at that natural magnet that you are. This is the bit of Offa's Dyke that goes between Kington and Glade Street, and Glade Street is towards Hay, and it's that way.
So what we're looking at is Malvern. That's the Malvern Hills. Of course it is. Yes, it is. Yes.
That's amazing. I can't believe I didn't know that.
And that makes perfect sense because that is the right shape.
Okay.
And then down there, Black Mountains.
Yes, over there, you're right.
And down towards Ross on Wye, etc.
Yeah.
Oh
my gosh. I've never seen that ever on any of my walks.
3 people riding up. Those are racehorses.
Yeah.
Oh,
this is the racecourse.
This is where there was a racecourse.
Yes.
In Victorian times, wasn't there?
Yeah, this is it.
Tell you what, there'd be a good old pull uphill on this, and I guess the spectators were in the middle where those ponies are.
So.
Do you see there's a newborn foal there as well amongst those wild ponies? In fact, there are 2 foals.
Yeah, I see it.
Given what you've experienced and what Richard went through with the General Medical Council, have you gone to them direct to say, look, your system of investigation needs to speed up? You can't take this long.
Yes, I have. I informed the GMC as soon as Richard died, and to their credit, they did agree to meet with me, and they told me of changes that they have been very keen to make the process less long-winded and also less enormously traumatic and stressful.
But equally, putting yourself for a moment in the position of you as a patient.
Yes.
If you felt, well, this could have been handled differently, or
absolutely,
did they make the right decisions? Was I on the right medication? What do you do with that?
That's right, and I absolutely see that there has to be a complaints procedure, but the way it's working at the moment is not the right way, and it just exposes us as doctors to anxiety and stress and soul searching, and often a feeling of not wanting to pursue the job.
Kate, given what you've seen and experienced, what advice would you have for people who worry about those close to them?
Well, I mean, I feel like, in a way, having lost my husband, I'm the last person in the world to give advice to anybody about this. But I suppose for what I wish I'd done for Richard is involved other people much more and much earlier. I feel that because I'd supported him through his previous depression the year before, I felt it was more of the same, really. I felt, well, we'll get through this one again, forgetting that he didn't have the support in New Zealand of his really close friends, of his family, and I wish that I hadn't tried to do so much of it myself.
But I'm so grateful to you for wanting to talk about it, because I do think one can only help someone else by being honest, and you do seem remarkably good at doing that without it feeling as if it's causing the pain all over again.
No, it doesn't cost me so much emotionally that it's not worth doing, if you see what I mean. And if it helps 1 or 2 other people, then that makes me happy that I'm doing it. They say that another way of looking at the grieving process is about redefining your relationship with the person who's died, which I find a really interesting way of looking at it. And I find that walking somewhere like this, which is so meaningful to me and was to Richard, really helps, because it's during those walks that you can feel that closeness to that person once again. Maybe talk to them, maybe not feel the need to talk to them, but certainly I find that a helpful way of looking at it. It's a redefining of the relationship, which continues after death.
You might walk the rest of it in silence, so that's right. Thank you, Kate.
Dr. Kate Harding was walking with Clare Balding. If you've been affected by the issues raised by Kate's experience, details of organisations offering information and support are available at bbc.co.uk/actionline. Or you can call for free at any time to hear recorded information on 08000 158 707. 08000 158 707.